Hello, everyone. Welcome to yet another episode of All Things Money. And today we have a very special guest, Mr. Adil Najam, who has been a proponent of climate change for a long time and has been focusing on and literally just really just talking about climate change for the last at least 2 decades at this point. And that's something that's in front of us right now. The country is facing right now. We're just going to talk to Adil and see what can be done in terms of adaptation, what can be done in terms of mitigation, how the country and its population can adapt to whatever is going to come up next. Thank you, Adil, for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Or Adil, so I just read your document on Living Indus, fascinating document, the work that has been done. So yeah, you call this the age of adaptation. Just thinking out loud here, if the Indus could speak, what is it asking Pakistan to do first and why now?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you for reading the document you mentioned, the Living Indus. This was done actually quite some time back, a few years ago, right? It was done right before the last floods, 2022, and released right after that. But the tragedy is it's still so relevant. And we start the document with the question you ask, if the Indus could speak to us, what would it say to us? I think if it could speak to us, depends where it is speaking. If it was speaking in the Punjab, it would say, Yaar, bande de putar ban jao. Get your act straight. The Indus has been here for millennia. It will remain here for millennia. The Indus is what made us, right? You can joke Indus is a river that flows in Pakistan and gave India its name, but the Indus gave much more than that to us, our civilization, our economy, our ecology, right? You take the Indus and everything we are is or a lot of it is the Indus. 80% of your population lives on the Indus Basin. 70% of your economy happens on the Indus Basin and because of the Indus Basin. Nine out of your nine largest cities are 40 kilometers or less from the Indus, right? So the Indus is truly the lifeline. And the Indus is also the defining element. It's even the defining elements of our songs, our love stories. Sasi Punnu isn't Sasi Punnu without the Indus, and so on and so forth. So what it would say to us is, I am what I am what I have been. You need to acknowledge and understand that and adapt to the changing realities of the world as it impacts me, i.e., the Indus, as it is flowing. And we are seeing that in real time happening in front of us every day on our screens. And the surprise to me is the surprise we express when the Indus speaks up, as in these floods.
Yeah, I mean, that's for sure. And, whatever we used to call 100-year floods are basically happening every few years at this point. So it's not a 100-year event anymore. It's a more regular feature. So, Adil, I mean, I fully agree with you. And whenever we look at let's say, the night map of Pakistan, where the lights are, we see the population essentially
Sure.
concentrated around the Indus, as you said, rightfully said, 40 kilometers on both sides of the Indus. So this is a lifeline, and Indus will be there, has been there for a millennia, will be there whether we're there or not after a millennia as well. So, what do you think are the quantifiable indicators or whatever that we can say, okay, you know what, Indus is healthy again, and what we need to do to get to that state?
Well, there are many, many things, and that's what that document did. I want to come to the floods today also, but what was it was asked for by the Ministry of Climate Change, and hats off to them. This was a very odd time. Think about what was happening in the country 21, 22. Three governments changed in that process very quickly. It was asked for by Malik Amin Aslam, the then Minister of Climate, and then the interim government came, and then the PML government came, and each one of them celebrated it, right? The minister celebrated it. It won a UN award on the best flagship policy document. Yet all it was trying to do was, "Ki, yaar, what would it take to keep the Indus living, right? The Indus has sustained us as a civilization for 5,000 years, depending on who you ask. At this point, we are not sure whether it will last 50 years as a living river. What does a living river mean? Living river mean a river that will do what it has been doing in ecological as well as human terms, giving sustenance to people who live on it and being ecologically strong and thriving enough for its essential processes to last. And by that I mean the nature around it, the fish within it. There's an Indus overland, there's an Indus underground, which we call groundwater. But if we start thinking, okay, the barometer is the Indus, right? So when if you are living in Islamabad or Lahore or wherever and you are digging for water in your home with a pump, and if you have to keep changing the pump after a few years because the water table is going down, that's the indicator the Indus is not doing well, right? Floods are a natural phenomena. We live on a floodplain. Floods have also been with us. There were times people would pray for floods, right? Floods is why we are fertile. But what we are seeing is not a flood, it is a calamity. The calamity happens when a not natural phenomena, i.e., floods, in this case, gets exacerbated by a human phenomena, climate change, so that what was happening every 100 years now happens earlier. And then it gets exacerbated by bad policy and bad governance because we have been building where we shouldn't have been building, right? Because we tried to tame the river where it could not have been tamed. So all of those three things combine to make the Indus the barometer that tells us that yeah, there is something wrong. So the calamity that is happening is not just the water. The calamity that is happening is that the water starts interfering with our human existence because our human existence has been trespassing on nature's limits, right? I don't want to be poetic about it. The best example is where we built. And usually it was the poor people, right? Usually it was people in the Kachcha area, southern Punjab and Sindh. And you would find the poorest people being forced to build on the most fragile grounds. And then when the flood would come, their homes would be destroyed. Now we are seeing the richest people building their richest obnoxious houses right on the floodplain where everyone will tell you, yeah, this is going to be hit, climate change or not, it's going to be hit, right? And yet having that arrogance of thinking, I have concrete, I can tame this.
So, I mean, what needs to be done differently? Let's say we have a clean slate right now. We know this is a problem, and we will have mega flood event like this happen every 3 years, 4 years. What policy changes do you think need to be done in terms of infrastructure, adaptation, mitigation? What needs to change?
I wish I was intelligent enough to know that answer. I wish there was someone in the world intelligent enough. That is why you don't fight with nature, because there aren't simple solutions. Right? There isn't a simple solution. If I had money, right? If you'd said, if I give you unlimited money, what would you do? I still wouldn't know a lot what to do. But what the Living Indus tried to do was it said there is no one answer, but there are a whole number of good things that you could do, none of which will solve the problem, but each of them will nudge it in a better direction. So if you look at the document at the end, what we have is essentially it's a short document. We fund out, we figure out, we say, what are the things that everyone kind of agrees on would make things better, not necessarily solve it, right? And those things include better city planning, right? It does include better forest cover. But if someone were to say, I'll just plant trees and the floods will go away, no, that's not true, right? It says better waste management into what we are throwing into the river. It includes, we have a proposal in there for 10,000, 100,000 ponds, right? Like you could imagine a billion trees, you can imagine 100,000 ponds. 100,000 ponds is how rivers were managed for millennia, right? Before we started thinking big concrete dams. And what they do is, so there is a whole bunch of these steps, and one can go into them. But the idea, again, the principal intellectual idea is that this search for silver bullets, every time we have a calamity, right, the noise level, the decibel level goes up. Sometimes it's on dams, sometimes it's on something else, as if there is a silver bullet and all the problem is about not having money. That's not it. We caused the problem by multiple bad mistakes. We're going to solve it by multiple small steps that just starts respecting it. I want to say something about climate change. I know this is an interest of yours, and I hope your readers, viewers will also appreciate this. We did this in the last flood. We are doing it again. There is not one, there is multiple things happening, and we conflate them, right? There is possibly a drought also going on in Pakistan or coming soon. There's a heat wave about to come soon. right? So we think as if climate change for Pakistan is only going to mean floods. It's not. But if you remember, first we had those pictures from Karachi, right? That wasn't a flood problem. That was a rain cloudburst problem. Karachi flooded because Karachi streets always flood. I grew up there. 40 years ago, I was in school in Karachi. My school was near a place called Empress Market, and we used to pray that it rains so that the exam won't happen.
Where was this?
This was in
St.
Karachi. Karachi
St.
near Empress Market because St. Patrick's High School would be closed every
St.
time
Patrick.
it
Yeah.
would rain, right? And I remember praying one time that it would rain and the streets did flood up, right? So that's one problem. That is an urban planning problem. That's a
Hmm.
solvable problem. Then we saw what I still think is the biggest calamity to have happened in the last 2 months, which was the glacial melt in Bunair in the north, right? You saw those landslides. And we now again conflate them with floods. They are related to floods. We talk about glaciers as if all they do is melt. But when they melt, things that are mountains no longer remain mountains. And that's what you are seeing right now. People are homeless because the rocks and the mountains started flowing down, not just water. Right? I often talk about this beautiful place called
Yeah.
Atabad Lake. We all love its beautiful pictures and hotels and stuff.
Got
We forget that until 2010, there was no Atabad Lake. There was a village called Atabad. The glacier broke. And then
Yeah.
now there is this third phenomena which is happening, which is the flood, which in some ways we are used to. We have lived with them for millennia. That is what makes Pakistan fertile. You know, you talk about economics. The reason Pakistan is an agricultural country is partly because of the floods. You take the soil in the best parts of the Punjab, send it to a lab, the lab will tell you this is arid land. Pakistan is an arid country. So, how did we become an agricultural economy? Right? No, it's not just the British and the colonials. Right before that, the floods would bring the alluvial soil. It would deposit that. You can go back and look. This is your area more than mine. The GDP always goes up after the flood. I can promise you it will go up in not next year because the next year will show the damage, and the year after that it will go up. GDP is a bad measure anyhow, but it always goes up after calamities. But the point I'm making is, so if we're going to be serious about climate, we cannot be episodic, right? There is an episode of a flood, so let's run after that. Oh, if we had a dam, everything would be okay. We have had over the last 20 years nearly a constant stream of floods, droughts, cloudbursts, and now a fifth season in Karachi, which is so predictable that you can call it a season.
Yeah.
It used to be four seasons. The fifth season is extreme heat. Extreme heat is going to come. I can tell you when it will start. I can tell you when it will end. I can tell you 600 people will die. I can tell you no one will care. We need to accept climate now as a reality. The reason I can't answer your simple question is part of the challenge of climate change here is it cannot, you can be sure it will happen, you cannot tell how it will happen. That's the important point. Allow me a minute on this. The important part of climate change as a word is not climate, it is change. What that means is climate, which is usually predictable phenomena, no longer remains predictable. So the fluctuations change. Two things happen. Either the amplitude change or the frequency changes. Amplitude means whatever the flood was becomes bigger. Whatever the drought was becomes bigger. Or the amplitude changes, meaning either it doesn't come at the right time, it comes too frequently, too infrequently. Now, as an economist, you will understand that you do that and your whole economy is off kilter, right? If you don't know when to grow cotton, floods make for pictures. But the calamity of climate change is that it messes up the entire cycles around which we organize life, right? Why do you live in the city you live in? Why do you wear the clothes that you wear at the time you clothe? Where, if you think about how much of your daily decisions, from individual to economy, are dependent on climate, and then I say I'm going to take the climate, it's up. Now we don't know where it'll fall. That is the enormity of the challenge.
Yeah, I think, I mean, absolutely on point there. So, Adil, you talked about thousand ponds, and how does that
100,000. See me tomorrow,
100,000
brilliant
ponds,
idea.
matlab, that's a way to address this challenge. One of the ways to address it,
One
we
of
fully agree
many.
that like 100, a lot of things need to happen to really figure out the impact of the delta and address it or hedge it. What is about the 100,000 ponds that can help us address this problem?
So think again. Now we are talking. Water is many problems. Water is one problem of water is there's too much, as in floods. One
Hmm.
problem of water is there's too little, as in when we were talking about these silly ideas that there will be no water left and so on and so forth. So water management has been one of the human innovations for millennia. And ponds were the way we would do it, what we call chapar in parts of Pakistan, but all across the world, and certainly in our area, one of the ways of dealing with water management was ponds. Ponds were natural, ponds were then humanly maintained, right? And every village or community will have a place where water would collect. One of the things that it does with the flood is, right, the challenge of the flood is partly that the water comes suddenly in very large amounts. When it comes suddenly, it is going to find its way. Going to come at speed and then destroy things. Now, more you can do to manage that flow is what, in very, very simple terms, I know it's not as simple, is what flood management is about. So when people think about reservoirs, they're immediately thinking of concrete and large amounts, but it does the exact same thing that any reservoir will do. But it does that at 100,000 different places. They don't have to be built by buildings, by governments. People in Karachi are doing this already, right? There are NGOs in Karachi, they are building sort of community ponds. They add to your social life because they give you nice green space, they bring back birds and so on and so forth. But they also break that torrent, right, in 100,000 different places. But they do many other things for each community, each village, in each growing cycle, and so on and so forth. But to me, the thought process is the idea. Trees do the same. What do the trees do? Right? When we say trees are a solution, how are they a solution? They are a solution because if you have dry ground, it gets baked in the sun, and when the water comes, it becomes like marble floor, and water is going to flow very quickly, right? So some basic hydrology principles, once we understand them and once we respect nature, you can think about it. To explain to your viewers, let me give an example. Have you noticed, because we've had so many of these, right? People have now seen these pictures so many times. When you see pictures of the flood from the north, right, Swat, then you see pictures of the flood in Punjab as you're seeing right now as we talk. And you are now beginning to see, and in 4 or 5 days, by the time people see this, they will be seeing pictures of the flood in Sindh. And of course, we talked about Karachi. All of those pictures are different. If you were to put those four pictures together, they're the same water, but they are different. In Swat, it is this torrent that is destroying buildings because the slope is great. The water is not that much, right? It's really streams, but it's coming at such ferocity that anything on its way, it's going to hit and destroy. By the time it's coming to Punjab, it is now consolidating. Now the question is, you have these large cities, as in Lahore and Kasur and so on and so forth, and that's why we've been talking about this many cusics or that many cusics. It's kind of funny hearing everyone talk about cusics when most of us don't even understand what a cusic is. But it's like a hockey commentary. This cusic went this cusic to that cusic, right?
Yeah.
But anyhow, once it comes to Sindh, you are nearly plain, and at many places the river is higher than the ground. That's why it's so dangerous, because you get those aerial photographs where all you can see is roofs, right? The reason I go into this is we are taking flood as only one example. We actually do not do enough justice to other things like drought, etc. But once you understand how nature has organized you, and once you understand the hydrology of this river that has given you life, you can find these solutions which will be different in different places, right? The 10, 100,000 ponds are much more useful in the plains than they will be in the in Swat.
Steep areas, yeah.
Yeah. So again, I'm not trying to push this solution or that solution. What Living Indus tried to do was it collected these 30 odd ideas. We said, let's go to the experts, let's ask them what are the things everyone agrees on will be better. And then we costed each one of them. And we said, if you're interested in this, that like you go to a shop. If all you have is $1 million, do this. If you can find me 100 million, do this. If you only have 100,000, do this. We even have, those. But again, I'm not trying to tout that idea. What I'm trying to say is that if we are constantly going to get surprised by things we don't get, shouldn't be surprised by, then we will be condemned to continue being surprised.
So that's the thing, Adil. Is capital really a problem at this point? I mean, we talk about capital unavailability, go to the GCF conferences, there's always a COP every year, complete nuisance if you ask me, and not much gets done there because whatever's really happening, whatever's really affected, they're not really representing there. Is it a capital problem or is it a will problem? How do we solve for that?
So, will also becomes a slogan sometimes, and capital clearly is a slogan. Capital is always a problem and nearly never a solution.
Yeah,
Right? It is always a problem, or lack of capital is always a problem, but it is nearly never a solution and nearly never a full solution. Which is why when the conceptual problem always is we say the problem is because there wasn't money for this, and so the solution becomes here's the money. But that doesn't solve the problem because in between there is what you call calling will, what you can call governance, you can call good policy, what you can call living with nature, and so on and so forth. Right? That's where it is. But capital is certainly a variable. Now it is a variable in very many places. You mentioned cops. I'm of the similar opinion, and we can talk about that in a minute about sort of this global finance, right, and the global injustice, which is true. But that's true as a slogan. Right now, there are people who are affected. So yes, for them it is a real issue. If you lose your cattle, you have lost your savings,
yeah,
right? If I lose a cow, as in Bhavalnagar, due to flood, that is the same as your entire portfolio on the stock exchange being wiped out. It's exactly the same because the cow is my saving mechanism. Right now, so let me give you an example. Let's take the 22 flood, right? Because it's recent enough in our memory. So where does capital become an issue? You would recall that at that time there was a lot of international attention
yeah.
because for the first time you had a global event where it was clear this was largely driven by climate, right? So the Secretary General comes and so on and so forth. The World Bank does an immediate, quick report, good report with other agencies, and I think the first number they came up with was $42 billion, right? They revised that down to about 30 billion.
20, yeah.
Now, the World Bank isn't very good at math that we know, so let's assume even that is not right, but it is some big number in billions. They say about half of that is the cost of damage, meaning I lose my house, I lose my cattle, I lose my crop. And about 15.2, I think they said billion was the cost of economic loss, right? Because economic productivity isn't happening in that and so on and so forth. Then you recall, stay with me on this. So let's say they originally said 42 billion, they revised it to 30 billion. Let's take that on its face. We had this big donor conference, you remember? Right? And you and all your friends and myself maybe were all over television because we were also going through a foreign exchange crisis, right? Dollar was jumping like as if it was, from like 200 to 270 in a few months and so on and so forth. There was IMF breathing down our neck. Everyone wanted dollars. So there's this donor conference in Geneva. And if you recall, that pledges something like, I think, eight and a half, maybe $10 billion, right? Most of that wasn't real capital. What it was the Saudis saying, we'll put money in your bank so that your foreign exchange, and then you can spend in rupees. Stay with me. I know I'm boring people with numbers, but this is
No,
important.
this is interesting. This is good.
42
Please
billion
continue.
problem recalculated to a 30 billion problem, meaning there's an actual loss. The calculation conservative was there's actual loss of 30 billion. International pledges of about 10, let's be generous, not 8, 10. Of that 10, we now know about 2 billion actually came. Okay? Most of them that went to government. Some of it might have come to people in the form of houses, etc. But people who've lost their cows, cattle aren't getting cattle out of it. They aren't getting houses rebuilt. So my question to you on the capital is, this is the crunch. Who paid the loss? Right? If the loss is real, someone has actually lost a house. Someone has actually lost cattle. Someone has actually lost a crop. So who paid for that? Right? That's the capital question. The poor invariably and always will pay the cost of climate change. So if you take the 42, turn it into the 30, subtract the 10, then add it back the 2, so you have something like at least $28 billion worth of loss. Let's say only the material loss, which is 15 minus 2, $13 billion loss. Who paid for it? So the person who paid for it was the farmer in South Punjab who lost his house, and therefore, how did they pay? Right? This is the real economy. This is the true economy of Pakistan. Is how did he pay? He pays like poor people pay all over the world. He took whatever savings he had for his daughter's wedding, or the extra cattle he had, which was his saving account. He sold that and rebuilt the place because he has to rebuild the place. Right? He did exactly what you would do if your insurance
Yeah.
wasn't there. Right? So that is the real climate finance. Real climate finance comes from ordinary people. This we run after it because we are interested in these dollars. Real climate finance in Pakistan. In Pakistan, there's been a climate finance revolution that the world is talking about. And that revolution has been my brother and your family and others putting solar panels on their roof. Right? That's actual climate finance, right? So they have financed from their savings, mostly because energy pricing was high. So the same with floods. So yes, capital is a problem, but capital alone is not the solution. The solution includes governance. You can see the slight anger in my voice. I'm usually not an angry person, but if you do this for this long, you do get tired of the slogans. And having spoken about governance for so long as the problem, I think now that has also become the a slogan, right? We take whatever political flavor we have in our mouth and say that's the problem. The governance problem here is give me cities that are better managed. Give me a livable Karachi, right? The things you have to do for Karachi is heat wave
Yeah.
or Lahore smog, or the floods are exactly the things that you have to do to make the lives of ordinary people better. Give me shade in Karachi, give me hydration in Karachi, give me better transport infrastructure in Lahore, particularly public transport in Lahore, and you will see these going away. This is why that question, what can we do? Is not an easy question. Not because we don't know what to do, but because there isn't a single
I
silver
think that's
bullet.
a very interesting perspective that you gave. The climate finance, the people are already doing that. Whether that's using your savings, whether that's just borrowing or anything, climate finance is already happening, and it is pure governance failure that it's not being managed in an efficient manner. So, Adil, I mean, to be fair, I've worked in climate here and there everywhere. The objective is largely just as you said earlier, get some dollars in place, get something in place. And that's about it. That's where everything stops. The moment you ask about, how you're exactly going to utilize it, what's the adaptation mechanism, what's the mitigation mechanism, it's just like silence, just like nothing is there. What do we do? Let's say, hypothetically speaking, we get some capital in place. What governance measures? And let's just focus on 100,000 pounds. Tomorrow we come and say, okay, you know what, Adil, let's just make 100,000 pounds. How do we execute this process? I really want to understand the practicality of it all in a purely, let's
Sure,
say, an
sure.
idealist state.
So first of all, you wouldn't call Adil Najam, you will call Simi Kamal. Simi Kamal is in Karachi. She runs many wonderful organizations. That idea came from her. She's already doing it. She's already gone ahead. She says, I can't do 100,000. I'll do whatever I can. So there are people, and she's just one of many, right? You will. The amazing thing, Amar, is there are so many good people doing so many good things all across Pakistan, right? Whether it is Recharge Pakistan with WWF, whether it is Simi Kamal, whether it is Ali Tokir, whether it is STPI, there are actually there's no dearth of answers. There is also no dearth of people, young people, Davar, Rafe. There are so many people who have the right ideas, the right knowledge. The question is sort of empowering them to be able to do these things at scale. Now, you talk about sort of what to do in this ideal state. Uh, you had mentioned climate finance in the beginning as an international climate finance, right? And I sometimes blame myself because all my career for 40 years, my thesis was on this, and ever since has been about this idea of global climate justice, that, climate is a tricky problem because the people who cause the problem are away, rich countries, and then poor countries have to pay for it. And out of that comes this idea of climate transfers. So One thing you would do very practically is take our report, Living Indus, but many other things that all these people and other people have done, and start funding the ideas that are already there. So rather than inventing a new one, right? You for climate ponds, right? For ponds, you would how would you what would you need? You would need decent local governance. You will need monies to be available, not at the provincial level, not even at the district level, but at some local level, right? Because someone sitting in Karachi or Lahore is not going to be interested in a small pond, right? That is not even a blip in their budget. That has to be a city level person, right? A small town level mayor, Nazim, whatever you call them. Because that's where you put the money where the benefit is. Money always works best if if those who get the benefit of its being spent right are in charge of spending it. Right? That's part of the problem with a quarter billion people country. Okay, so coming back to the international part and linking the two, the challenge with the international finance is the moral logic of why there should be global climate finance is impeccable. It was impeccable on mitigation, it is impeccable on adaptation, it is impeccable on loss and damage. The problem is there is no incentive for those who need to pay. If the rich of the world haven't given reparations for colonialism, if they haven't given reparations for slavery, why do you expect they are going to do it for climate? And even if they wanted to, the challenge with climate is the climate is happening everywhere. So even if Trump wasn't president, if LA is on fire, if there are fires in Australia, if there's climate change all across Europe, even if they want to help us, their first priority will be themselves, right? That is why developing countries need to, I keep calling it, I've been giving a whole bunch of talks and writing about, make climate a desi problem. That until we make it a desi problem, it won't work. And what do I mean by a desi problem? You start with what is hurting people in Pakistan rather than this high level politics of they caused the problem, therefore we will cut our nose in spite. The other part is exactly what you said. Some countries have gotten climate finance. So why hasn't Pakistan? Right? Why has a Bangladesh been more successful in harnessing whatever little climate finance there is? Right? Not because their sob story is better than ours. Our sob story is as good as any, but because they had climate ready projects. That's why Living Indus was done. Again, the reason we costed each one of them, Malik Amin Aslam said, Ki, give me something that I can take to these meetings and say, this is what I need funded. Right? So we need what in the US they call shovel ready projects.
Yeah.
And the shovel ready projects, unfortunately, we are so enamored by silver bullets. Unless it is the biggest this or the largest that, we are not interested. Right? And the best solutions to this are very often small,
Yeah.
local, indigenous, right? That is why the miracle was solar panels. The miracle of solar panels, people will write about this in the future. The energy transition in Pakistan is real. And it happened not because of dams, it didn't happen because of Thar coal, it didn't happen because of CPEC. It happened because my brother, who has no interest in the climate, got fed up with the bill he had to pay. Right? I'll give you another example. I know we are getting away from floods, but it's a very good example. Kathmandu, Nepal, right? Himalayas up there, much poorer than any city in Pakistan, much worse planned, and so on and so forth. Supposedly, a third of households, these are poor households, have solar water heating. Kathmandu में अगर हो सकती है, right? Up where you don't even get the sun that much. Why cannot you have that in Karachi and Lahore?
I mean, it's changing. I work in energy and how solar has been prevalent. It's basically threatening the grid at this point. And I
Sure.
would say in the next few years, it will be a major fiscal crisis because the grid is going to get unsustainable.
I hope that is a fiscal crisis. That's what's called a good fiscal crisis.
Yeah, that's a good fiscal crisis because it's happening right now in front of us, and there's simply no understanding of what's going to happen. As you know, just kicking the can down the road, sadly, the road is ending at this point.
But
There's
that's
no
how
tech.
transitions happen, right? the energy transition, I started my career focusing on energy. I've stopped talking about energy for a long time because I think the energy transition is baked in.
Yeah, yeah.
There's no stopping it. Trump can't stop it because
No, no,
it's
it's the market is leading it. The market is
right.
favoring oil.
At
It's
this
pretty.
point in Abu Dhabi, right, where you stomp the ground and oil comes out. In Abu Dhabi, the cost of renewable energy is now comparable to hydrocarbon,
Yeah, yeah, that's right. That's right.
right?
It's actually cheaper, I would say. Yeah,
Yeah. So
absolutely.
once that curve meets the other curve, then the logic is impeccable.
Either it's very refreshing to actually see someone saying, you know what, the solutions are more small, modular, and local rather than big and massive. So, what do you think? I mean, you have studied this a lot, and you know, there are very few people who would actually have that body of knowledge or understanding of how the same can be replicated across Pakistan. If you were given an option, what are the three projects or three core interventions that you would do to really, let's say, accelerate the whole adaptation and mitigation process? What would those be?
So that's a good question. That's a really good question, and by good I mean I have no idea of the answer. But I because I think there are so many different things that need to be done differently. But one thing I would start with is let's also acknowledge the good things that we have done. Right. So in a way, I have, including myself right now, but we usually, because the problems are so big, we get so focused on the problem and the needs that we fail to celebrate the good because sometimes the clues to what needs to be done is there. So if we take the current flood, for example, technically till now, I know I'm sitting far away in Boston, but I'm, following it cusick by cusick by cusick. I think we've done a very good technical job of managing this. The flood is just so massive. It is historically so massive. We will have a major test coming in the week from when we are recording, when this enters Sindh, because by that time, all of this is coming together. And what I mean by that is we've done especially well on the flood management engineering side. We've done relatively well on the disaster relief side, right? The NDMA, PDMA structure has had now so much practice with earthquakes and with floods and so on and so forth that they've become pretty good. The tents get there in time. People are not always happy. They can never all be happy because part of what you have to do in disaster management is you have to take tough decisions, right? Where are you going to do the breach? Someone is going to get hurt more than the other. If you do it right, you will try to do it logically so that the less damage even if there's damage, it is less than what could have been. So what I'm pointing out is we have done fairly well on the disaster relief side. We have not done very well on the prevention side,
Yeah.
partly because the money is on the relief side and the attention is on the relief side, right? No one gives you a pat on the back as a politician or a bureaucrat or a technocrat because the flood that could have come didn't come, right? So there is no incentive structure. The incentive structure is always after the disaster.
Yeah.
That's the challenge with a lot of climate policy. We saw that in COVID, right? Once COVID came, the world was very quick on the vaccine. It was amazing. But even knowing it was coming, it was very bad on the prevention. Climate is even worse. The problem with climate is climate, if not prevented, cannot later be solved because it's the nature. So let me just, I'm sorry I've put that up. What are the type of things I've done? First thing I would do is I would not make any new laws. I would make the implementation of existing laws, particularly local building codes, much more focused and implementable, right? Where you build, how you build, what you build. I know it sounds petty in the context of what we are talking about, but you do that one thing in major cities and small places, and a lot of it is gone. Do you
Yeah.
know, do you know the story of Honeymoon Hotel?
No, sir, please do. Please
You
share this.
do, you do. You just don't know the story of Honeymoon Hotel. Remember, yeah, in the last floods, there was this picture that went viral, this video, then CNN also showed it. There was a
Yeah, they're just like crumbling
structure
down.
and it just sort
Yeah.
crumbling.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
the Honeymoon Hotel. As far as I can tell, the story is that it was built before the 2010 floods. It broke every code in the book, right? Every rule that was already there. Then the flood came and the same thing happened. And the guy became a local hero because he said, I am a Pakistani. We are a resilient people. We will not let the flood defeat us. Help me build this back. And he built the same structure back to which this has
Wow.
happened. The local authorities try to stop him, right? So it's not even as if the system fails. But political clout or whatever, he doesn't get failed. He builds it again. You and I and our friends go up to Swat, eat kadai there because supposedly you can see your water, the water right underneath where you are eating, and you can dangle your feet in it. And then the 22 floods came, and that video came, and it becomes viral. CNN shows it, and so on and so forth. I was in Pakistan a few months after that and asked a friend to find out what had happened to that. And he calls up friends up there, and they tell me they've already started construction again. Right? To me, that's the archetypical story of what I would do. Right? Local building. You see this in Lahore right now. You see this in Karachi. So that is one thing I would do. It's very similar, by the way, something that you again know and work on. It's very similar to what I would do if I had to fix the electricity system,
Yeah.
right? It's those wires and the billing and the losses. That's the equivalent here. You would plug that. The second is what I'm calling sort of nature, making our living spaces more nature friendly and livable. What that means is greenery in Lahore. What that means is trees and hydration in Karachi. What that means is the 10,000 ponds, things that would bring the natural systems of flood management here, right? So the type of people who talk about trees, the type of people who talk about riverine forests, right? Because there are all sorts of these barriers. That's the second type of thing that I would do, sort of these nature-based solutions as they're called. That's the second type of thing that I would do. And the third type of thing I think on the floods question I would do is just better understanding of assuming that the floods will be more, and therefore rejigging our relief systems not to the 100-year flood model, but to a shorter duration flood model, right? So we have been fairly good at managing these when we know how they will come. What has changed is, as I said, the fluctuation has changed, right? So because you put me in a spot, that's the type of things I would do. But if someone else came with a better idea, I would say, please do that. There's this Pablo Neruda poem, which of course is in Spanish, I don't know, but this the gist of it is, do something. If you don't like my idea, get me your own. But for God's sake, do something. And what I'm getting at is there are plenty of solutions. They're mostly small scale, but they need to be implemented. We spend too much time in what we call in Urdu kide nikalna, in finding small faults in things that are generally right. But urban planning, urban code, crop management is another one that would be, so we should be proud of our heritage of water management rather than just bogging down into these less useful debates.
I think this is excellent, Adil. Just one last question. I mean, I've been a big proponent of this modular project management. Everyone basically is horrible at large scale project management, and there's always like, excess cost, timeline delays, so on and so forth. You need to be modular, you need to be small, but as you said earlier, the incentive structure is built such that you're not everyone would want to do something big, something massive. The highest in the world, the best in the world, the largest in the world. No one just wants to focus on like 10,000 ponds. They would want, let's just make a one mega dam rather than, like 10,000 ponds because it's not, let's say, attractive enough for to get you that, let's say, appreciation. So one last thing, Adil, before we wrap our conversation. I mean, this is a never-ending conversation at that. What would be your most controversial idea, to just, move us towards adaptation? What would be controversial enough? Okay, you know what? Let's just do this. It will be controversial. It may not be politically correct, but somehow that solves the problem. What would that be?
I don't think it'll be controversial, but I think the unusual, because people usually don't think like that, is uh, to think of adaptation as an opportunity.
Yeah.
Right? because it sounds odd, especially you're talking in the middle of a flood. But adaptation is the biggest development opportunity that countries have gotten to change their model, right? So what you were talking about modular, people in the political side often talk about local governance. The logic of local governance is exactly what you have just laid out, right? The issue is not big or small. The issue is, in systems theory, we always talk about this, that the solution should match the scale of the problem,
Yeah.
right? So there are some things, sending a man on the moon, it should be done centrally and big. But if you are saving city and town and village, if that's what you're thinking about, then the solution has to be city and town and village, right? And that's the logic of appropriate governance, that governance has to be at the right level. You can't do it long distance from capitals and stuff. But on your controversial idea, not the controversial, but to me, adaptation is a opportunity in the following sense. Right? Development is very path dependent. Ideas come and then they become fashions, and then the IMFs and the World Banks and whatever, they keep churning out the same thing. They're not bad people, but they're churning out what they have, right? Jo churan hai, wahi becenge, right? So, which is perfectly fine. I do the same. But then comes a shock, and the shock forces you to rethink. Show me, Ammar Khan, show me a good adaptation project, and I will show you a good development project.
Yeah.
What is adaptation? Adaptation is putting trees in. Agar climate change झूठ भी हो, even if it is a total lie, wouldn't trees in
तरफ तो
Punjab
लग
be
गया
a
हाँ
good
मतलब
thing?
हाँ
Right? Adaptation is better water management. Even if the flood wasn't coming, wouldn't that be a good thing? Right? So if we start thinking of adaptation not as a cost, but as an opportunity to rejig, right? Allow me just 2 minutes. I know we're running out of time, but
no no please go ahead.
one is also to, maybe this is related to this, but to think of water as an opportunity. I have been saying and writing for the last 15 years that water is the front edge of climate change. Water is to adaptation what carbon was to mitigation.
Okay.
Because mitigation was all about carbon, because essentially it was about energy.
Yeah.
And all of it was carbon management. That is where EVs came from. That is where solar came from, and whatever. Water is the same to adaptation for the following reason. Think about this. Think about this. What happens when climate changes? A lot of it is about water.
Yeah.
Water melts, glacier. Water disappears, drought. Water rises, sea level rise. Water falls from the sky like no one's business. Extreme events and floods, right? So if we start thinking of climate as a water issue rather than a carbon issue, that would be one. And the other is this adaptation as a development opportunity. Again, very briefly, if you think about what this is, the basis of at least what I talk about in my classes, mitigation is trying to solve a problem before it happens, right? Something bad could happen. So what do I do so that it doesn't happen, right? So the failure of mitigation is adaptation. If it does happen, what do I do? I can't stop the rain now, so I'll have an umbrella. An umbrella is adaptation. A jacket is adaptation. The problem, the economic problem with adaptation is the umbrella has a cost. And then the question is who's going to pay the cost? And the failure of adaptation is what we call loss and damage.
Okay.
Right? So what we want is a world where we don't move towards loss and damage. We are already there. But we use adaptation to change our living systems in a way, have enough umbrellas, that we can manage the uncertainties and the amplitudes of what is coming with climate change.
Absolutely. I think I always say it's more of an efficiency problem rather than a loss and damage problem because if systems are better, if they're localized and a lot more can change rather than just trying to think big and as you said कि डैम बना दो हर मसले का हल डैम बनाने से हल हो जाएगा. Absolutely, Adil. Thank you very, very much for your time. It was an absolute pleasure talking to you. And I hope to have you again on our show very soon so that we can just continue this discussion. Thank you very much for this.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much.